have my strawberry dress on today, and I'm very, very boring in my clothing choice, but I've got the unenviable task of talking to you about the exciting subject of weights and measures regulations, which would, frankly speaking, probably put a glass eye to sleep. So bear with me, lunch isn't far away, but what my aim is here is to try and demystify something that is generally, because it's a government thing, I'm not here talking about A&D really, it's about the legislation that we all live with. That's a pretty boring subject, but I'm going to try and demystify it for you. So, as was mentioned before, this presentation was done at Hawke Connections last year, and having the genetic disorder of being a male, I'm very lazy. So this is pretty much exactly the same rinse and repeat of that presentation. So if you're thinking it's Groundhog Day, it is. Yes, sorry. So a lot of these questions are pretty obvious, and normally the answer to the middle question is, what is AQS? What is it? I don't know what E-weights are. E-weights is the common term people use in Australia to explain it. And more importantly, if you don't understand it, there's no chance you're going to explain it to packing shed staff. So I'm here to try and explain what it is. There's three products that most of us would be familiar with, and when you look at the symbol on there, that's the little E symbol. That means it was packed under average weight rules and legislation, or in Australia, the average quantity system. That's what AQS stands for. So lots of boring terminology to come, don't worry, strap yourselves in. So in the fresh produce space, and these are some examples from a couple of the majors, obviously not berry related, but fresh produce nonetheless, there are plenty of examples of branded products that are actually E-weight packed and done to the E-weight system. So a lot of people say, oh, Coles, Woolies, whoever, insert name here, don't allow that or don't permit it. I can't vouch for the category specifically of different particular products, but they definitely do accept E-weights. And there's proof if you just walk through the aisles of your supermarket. So now for the really boring stuff. If you Googled NMI AQS, so the National Measurement Institute is the legal metrology body in Australia that governs weights and measures. And there's these two, that's the website on your left, and there's a guide to the average quantity system, another download that you can look at. And that's where they go into a lot of statistical analysis, and this gets pretty deep pretty quickly. So again, my task today is to try and demystify a little bit of it rather than death by PowerPoint. So let me explain the why it was introduced. So the slide, the graph on the right-hand side here is essentially what people pack into, whether you're packing berries in a punnet or putting peanuts in a bag. Most people who pack to minimum weight, they're ensuring that the worst case scenario, the most underfilled package, is still above the weight that you print on the package. Okay, so if I've just picked a round number of a 500 gram product, the tolerances of machines or people, no matter whether it's a mechanical filled process or a human powered process, as many berry sheds are, there will be a plus or minus that even on the best day you say, I can never get it better than X and Y, plus or minus. So I've used a plus or minus 5 grams as an example. But as you can see there, if you're packing to minimum weight, every pack you're aiming to have above that compliant level that you're advertising as on the package. So the average by nature is going to be sitting significantly above. Now obviously in berries there's also overpack for things like dehydration in the chain. We're making sure that the consumer is getting at the end of the shelf life, what they're paying for. So that's still relevant in here, but basically the average is going to sit well above what you're actually selling. In the E-weight world, that diagram on the left shows you very clearly that you are allowed to have a certain number of underweight packs. Now, it doesn't mean that the consumer is going to be happy when they buy it, but it just means their next door neighbour got their extra raspberry, right, in a nutshell. So it's not going to necessarily stop customer complaints, because if people in our industry have no clue about E-weights, I can guarantee if you did a pop quiz as people walking out of the local supermarket, 0.000% would have an understanding about E-weight system. They're just going to be pissed off because they didn't get what they thought they paid for. So educating every aspect of your business, both from the packing shed floor, the operators that have to actually do this job, through to your marketing people who are going to deal with customer complaints. You need to have everyone understanding this, that no one's going to jail, no one's ripping off people, because that's the story we love to see on a current affair at least twice a year. So-and-so got ripped off, big end of town, ripping off the poor consumer, blah, 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 blah. We've all seen it. So the average weight system is saying that when I produce 10,000 packets of X, I'm guaranteeing that the average of that was above the number printed on the pack. So when you see the little E symbol, that's what the producer of that product is actually saying. So there were some underweights and there were some overweights. So basically for every overfilled punnet, you're allowed kind of one that's equally underweight in generic terms. And there are obviously rules about this. You can't give a punnet with one berry in it and then make up for it with a punnet with twice as much in it. Clearly that's not allowed. So what I'm going to do now is sort of dive into some of those rules. But obviously the savings, people can do the maths, it's pretty simple. The first and most boring part, like any government website, you can look at this table and you go, shit, do I have to start learning this? No, you don't. This is the NMI table about the tolerable deficiency. So already the words start to get big and boring and complicated. That QN symbols is from French, quantity nominale, and it's basically a fancy way of saying that's the number printed on your package. Okay, that's the amount that you're selling. And depending on the weight range, most people in this industry are going to be between that sort of 100 to sort of 500 gram range. The allowable tolerance, underweight tolerance, it does vary. So you're going to be around that sort of 4.5 to 3% range for your tolerance value, T. The letter T, it's important when I move on to this. Now, you don't need to remember that stuff. In the normal world where 90% of berry people live in Australia, their weight control system is simple. It's either okay, over or under. There's just three simple bandwidths. So immediately you get a disconnect when you start talking about AQS because all those simple terms are now replaced with all this garbage. All these other terminologies. Oh, is it good? Is it bad? It's very hard to really get, when you start to drill down to packing shed staff, you've got to, it can be a little bit intimidating to think you've got to teach them to understand all this. Well, yes and no, you kind of don't. So yeah, clear as mud. Let me put a graphic up that really explains the differences between these situations. In the world where most people live in Australia, there's two red lines. It's either over, where you decide as a business that's too much, I'm going to rework that product and not give away that much produce, or it's under, where you clearly don't want to go because that's going to get you in a world of hurt with consumer affairs. And those lines are set on your system, whether it's machine filled in a blueberry line or manually filled and going through a check weigher. Those lines are set by you and you choose what they are. In the E-weight world, and this is where it gets interesting, you notice I've used green and orange because underweight items, depending on how underweight they are and what the statistics are during the batch of production, can be potentially rejected or accepted. And the reason I've used orange is because even if they're rejected, they're what we'd call a temporary reject. You don't need to open the punnet. You don't need to rework it. Just let it sit there for a minute or two, and then when some more overweight packs come through and the statistics support that underweight pack, it will be allowed to go through into the batch. So it's a little bit involved, but basically you'd need to have an end-of-line weight checking machine, which most very significant berry places do have that technology. We obviously make that, and there's many reputable companies that do that sort of equipment, and especially if it's come from Europe, where the E-weight system has been in play for like 40 or 50 years. So anyone who's worked, there's a lot of people in this industry have come from England, they've seen the light. They don't quite barrack for the Australian cricket team yet, but we'll keep working on that. They go, why aren't you doing E-weights? It's just normal where I come from. The giveaway gains are just ridiculous that you can get, and the efficiency gains. So in the E-weight world, clearly overweight is still overweight. You decide what that is. That's a business decision. How much is too much? Do you want to rework it if it's worth the time? Obviously sitting above the green line, and again I'm using 500 grams as a simple example here, that's happy customer, right? But not so much happy you guys, because you're giving away stuff more than you need to. Once you move below the 500 gram line, and I've used this example, so 15 grams is the T, the tolerance value in this example. You're allowed actually an unlimited number of packs between 500 and 485. No limit, as long as the average at that point in time stays above 500, all right? So that's the rule that defines whether it's a reject or accepted in that band. Then we get to this thing called T1. So I said T is equal to 15 grams in this scenario. You're also allowed a small number of packages in this more underweight bandwidth, so the T1 bandwidth. That's why, again, orange and green as an indicator. But there are some rules around how many. There's a very limited quantity you're allowed in that bandwidth. So you could legitimately have again, putting aside loss of weight for dehydration, on a 500 gram pack, you could legitimately have some packs weighing 471 and it's still legal, all right? And if you're in the muesli bar world doing a 40 gram muesli bar, tea is like 9%. So it's quite a, it's a big number. And then there's the red line at the bottom. T2, nothing's allowed to be more than 2 times T below the nominal weight. That's a hard reject, just like your overweights. So if you've got a weight system with 2 reject channels, you can actually say, oh, these are our temporary rejects, just wait a few minutes, put them back through and the statistics support those packs. These are our hard rejects for rework. So a lot of people do that with e-weights. So that must be clear as mud so far. You're all awake, which is quite remarkable. So the rules of AQS or e-weights are, like I've alluded to before, the quantity of underweight, slightly underweight, let's call them, less than nominal items is actually unlimited. There's no limit to the number as long as the average stays above the nominal weight during your batch. And the word batch is thrown around a lot here. So if you produce a job lot, a sales order, that's not defined by NMI, it's defined by you as a business. So if you've got let's call it a sales order, 10,000 punnets is on that order, that's your batch. And you don't tell your system we're doing 10,000 so it has time to catch up. You monitor these statistics in real time as you produce your product. And what I see as best practice is people generally start on the high side, because rejecting stuff and putting it back through is, fruit could get damaged, that's not efficiency. Start a little bit on the high side, but make sure your people know where the end game is for that particular batch. Keep an eye on these key statistics, and as you're going through the batch, you would start to maybe underfill a little bit with the aim of landing the plane on the piano keys on the runway. I come from an aviation background, and that's the way I look at it. You want to be as close to that average at the end of your batch as possible, because then you've basically got the best yield you can out of your bunch of product. That's how it works. So, like I say, in that first band, no limit to the quantity as long as the average stays above the amount you're selling. And in the second band, the more underweight T1 band, you can never have more than 2.5% of the total quantity. So that's like 1 in 40 or 25 in 1,000, however you want to do the maths. So the check weigher or your inline system will be policing these numbers as your product is going through. And it's not going to allow the numbers to break those rules. If a punnet or pack comes along that's going to break those rules, it gets rejected in that category. All right? So that's how it works, and clearly it hard rejects anything that's significantly underweight. So yeah, they're the basic rules, the statistical rules of e-weight, of the e-weight system. Hopefully that makes some sense to you guys. And look, like anything, a lot of people are change phobic. Oh, I've done it this way for years, we just put an extra one in. Just put an extra one in, keep the customer happy. When you do the maths, and this is the $64 million question, because I reckon it's about how much money the industry gives away each year in overpack, it's like, wow, that's a lot of money, and everyone's looking for sustainability as a buzzword, but financial sustainability is what keeps us all employed. And this is hardcore financial sustainability. If you can improve your yields by 3-4%, by doing exactly the same thing you do now, but just by following this process, obviously you've got to get buy-in from your customers. If they own the brand that you sell, that's number one. You really want to chat with your customers. If you've got your own brand product, it's your decision. There's no one to stop you doing this. It's been legal in Australia since 2010. And the benefits are significant. Even if you had 6 months worth of pre-printed packaging, and not many people know this, you can apply to the NMI for an exemption to say, look, we've got 6 months of packaging, we don't want to waste it, waste is bad, blah, blah, blah. We're going to start doing this product on e-weights. You need to get written approval by that government body to say, yes, that's acceptable. And you can start doing it straight away without even putting the E symbol on there. For those brothers and sisters from across the Tasman, it's not known widely, but the New Zealand weights and measures system actually just publishes e-weights only. Average weight is their system, and I understand from a higher authority than me that you don't even need to print the E symbol in New Zealand. You can just pack to this straight away. That is the law. So again, in this industry, people just are A, unaware of it, B, scared of it, because something detailed like this, it's like, oh, underweight is bad. That's the general programming of humans to think that someone's going to be in trouble, but it's not actually true. So this system is designed for maximum efficiency of manufacturing. That's where it comes. Obviously, your customers need to be educated. So you will, as I alluded to at the beginning, get complaints because no one wants an underweight pack. But it's a matter of, oh, we're really sorry, we packed to the e-weight system, here's some resources about it, here's a box of berries, go have a nice day sort of thing. So it's a customer happiness discussion. And look, there will always be people who are not happy. Obviously, you've got to put the symbol, that it doesn't matter if it appears before or after the weight value, but it must be next to the weight value. You can download that, the actual E symbol from the NMI website to get it correct. That has to be on your packaging. And then make sure your inline, end-of-line systems can run AQS, because the key thing here is data capture. You really need to have a robust data capture. Now, you can have a human recording the weight of every pack, but your 15-minute QA sampling, whilst handy and sometimes a requirement for your customers' happiness, is not really going to cut it. Have your system that's at the end of the line capturing the data, so you can prove that if there was an underweight product, that your batch was compliant. You can look at your batch records. Because what will happen is a weights and measures inspector, if you've got a really shitty customer who wants to escalate this, will go to the point of sale and grab a box and do their sample testing that they do in line with weights and measures protocol. And it's highly likely, if that was from the end of your run, all those packs may be underweight, and it will fail that point of sale test. So then the next thing is, come knocking on your door, these were underweight, we've got a complaint. You go, no worries, let's look at the batch data. Here's the batch data from that day. Go away, have a nice day. It's all compliant, all right? So the education thing, I think, is the really important piece of this, to get people to understand that it's not actually bad or illegal or big end of town ripping off little end of town sort of thing, because that's the sort of negative messaging that comes out with this sort of thing. People think, you know, it's the big companies taking advantage of people and ripping them off. It's not actually the case. So if you can get buy-in and education through your whole business, that's really important if you implement this. We implemented it at a major honey company in Queensland 6 years ago, and they pack for most of the majors. And they had a lot of staff turnover in this factory in Brisbane, and they found that after they had a big staff change, they were still giving away like $500,000 worth of honey a year. It's a big number. And it was purely because the people on the factory floor didn't understand, and they'd do a QA test maybe 3/4 of the way through the batch, and QA person does their little check of, 10 bottles of honey. Oh, Johnny, they're underweight, turn up the filler. And that's kind of just a misunderstanding of the fact that they could be underweight and be allowed. Don't adjust the filler, because this is where you're getting your yield back. This is where you're winning. So we go there, they ask us to come back pretty much every 6 months just to retrain their staff, because the training element is probably the most important part of this. It's, so that's really my summary, and again, as I said, you're all awake, which is a good sign. If you've got any questions, obviously lunch is going to be served, we're around, so if you've got any questions about this, I definitely don't profess to be a statistician or a brainiac on the deeper diving of this, but there are people around in the industry that consult for people that are going through these sort of process, just to make sure it's all done correctly for bigger business. Or if you've got any other questions, don't hesitate to ask. But that's my session on e-weights. Hopefully it's helpful.